Welcome to Talent Takeover
Unfiltered.
When it comes to working hard and keeping it real, we know our shit. Self-care, happiness, inner peace, and time. I'm Brianna Rooney, and this is Taylor Bradley.
Hey, y'all.
And we have thrived in chaos and turned it into an art form. So Taylor, what are we doing here today?
We're here to give you a raw, under-the-hood view of all things recruiting and finally give credit where credit is due to a long underrated industry that's full of quote-unquote experts.
All right. Well, then let's take this show to the road.
Hey there, it's Brianna Rooney, your Millionaire recruiter. And if you've been keeping up with the buzz in recruiting, I hope you have, you've been hearing a lot about, AI. Everywhere you turn, there's talk about automation, machine learning, algorithms. What in the world does that mean? How do you take those buzzwords and translate them into actionable strategies for your recruitment process and get some time back? Doesn't everybody want some time? I know I do. Well, you're in for a treat because I'm teaming up with Recruit CRM for an upcoming webinar that's going to be a game changer. And we're not just going to give you theories. We are going to roll up those sleeves and provide a live demonstration. So this is your golden opportunity to see firsthand how to seamlessly blend AI into your hiring and recruiting strategies. Ready for a sneak peek? We're giving you a crystal clear roadmap to implement AI step by step so you can hit the ground running. Every innovation has its roadblocks, and we're giving you proven strategies to overcome the challenges of integrating AI. We will show you AI in action. It's where theory meets practice, and you'll be right there with us for a hands-on showcase of AI in the real world. And we will end with a crystal ball moment to help you stay above the curve and your competitors, and we'll arm you with the insights, AI in recruitment, where it's heading, all the cutting edge advantage. So, are you ready to take the plunge? It's time to up your recruiting game. So join us for this revolutionary session. Just click on the link attached to this post and secure your spot. And yeah, guess what? It is absolutely free. And I'm thrilled to see you there and dive into the exciting world of AI and recruitment together.
Hello. Welcome to Talent Takeover Unfiltered. Of course, yes, we're laughing again in the beginning.
Shocker.
So glad you're here. Thanks so much for, we're getting our subscribers up. We're getting more listeners around the world, which is super exciting. So please, if you do like our content, share it, love it, like it, comment, all those great things.
And if you don't like it, fuck off. No.
She's not kidding.
No, I'm not at all. But if you're our listener, then you'll actually appreciate that statement. If you are truly a TTU listener, I'm doing good. I mean, we say this every time, but every time we have these podcasts and start our day this way, it's always a good day for me.
100%. Okay.
Start the day laughing, cracking jokes.
I know. So it's we're going to be I guess a little controversial, but when are we not controversial, right? We're going to talk about layoffs and then rehires. There's a lot of companies out there, and one triggered this conversation, but there's a lot of companies out there that are doing mass layoffs, and all of a sudden, like next week or within a month, I would say at least, all of a sudden there's all these positions open for exactly who they laid off but they have lower salaries. So Taylor, because I know you're the one that saw this, I can't wait to hear your broke to boss tip at the end.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I think this one, it's not new, right? Like this has been happening for years. Companies have done this for years. Every time I feel like there's a big layoff, like I can remember around 08, 09 time frame, something very similar happened, and there's a lot of different schools of thought on it. But I think specifically for recruiting is what makes this particular topic that we're going to discuss so interesting, because again, all companies do this with positions across, the whole organization across different verticals. But I think why it's so interesting with recruiting specifically is what we've seen the last I remember when we initially started recording this podcast, we were like, fuck yeah, recruiting's finally getting the respect it deserves. And you know what I mean? Like it was like for the first time in both of our careers, and we've both been doing this for, 15, 16 years. Finally, recruiters are getting the respect we deserve. They're finally getting these salaries. Organizations are finally understanding and appreciating what we do and realizing like it is a job, not just anybody could do it. No, not just a monkey couldn't do it. Like what you said, the story you've shared so many times on the podcast. And so I think, one in particular that I saw recently, and I'm sure you saw it too, is Meta. So Meta, as we all know, was doing a bunch of hiring these last few years. did some layoffs. And then, now I'm seeing all of these posts on LinkedIn where recruiters are really upset, understandably so, but they're upset because they're seeing their roles that they were just laid off from, a month, 2 months ago, within the last 6 months. And they're seeing those roles posted for a lesser salary.
Yeah, I think that's crazy. So, now here's what's interesting. Do we think that they're real job postings? And so here's what I mean by that. So I saw quite a few of like our old clients post recently, and I was like, damn, like no one called me. Like you guys used me. Like why wouldn't you use me again? Like that's crazy. I'm starting to get offended by this. So I hit up a couple of them, and I was like, what the heck? Why aren't you calling me? And they're like, oh no, those are opportunistic hires. Like we're not actually looking, but we have LinkedIn job posts, and we've paid for them already. So why would we not just kind of build top of funnel? So when we are hiring in a few months, and I was like, are you serious? All of these people wasting all of their times to apply for these jobs. They're not actually open right now.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I mean, I get the logic behind building pipe for sure.
Totally.
Huh.
Well, and what's interesting about that is that I've actually seen some job postings that say just that. We're pipelining.
See,
we're not.
They
hiring
should
right
say
now.
that.
I
for
agree
sure
completely.
think they should say that. I think
And
it's so rude.
I agree completely. And I think people, like you said, they need to know what they're signing up for. Like, am I signing up to be in somebody's pipeline, or am I signing up to actually, submit an application, do all of this work in hopes that I'm going to get an interview? You know what I mean? Because they could never actually need that pipeline. I've worked in very large corporations where we used to do that, but we are very forthcoming. Like we're building our talent pool, but we would have no time frame of when we would actually need to leverage that talent pool. So you could get a call from us in a year. You could never get a call from us. You could get a call in a month, a week, you don't really know.
Yeah.
So I think people, like, that's the disclaimer there. I think organizations need to be transparent about what they're doing in that regard. But I think going back to, companies letting recruiters go, posting those jobs, I think, one interesting thing that I read that I was like, fuck, it sucks, but it makes a lot of sense, is going back to the time frame like we were talking about whenever we first started this podcast, and we were seeing, recruiters being able to command these really high salaries. I know we had a client particular that, we hired a recruiter for them at the highest salary I'd ever seen for a recruiter at $400K per year. Highest I've ever seen a recruiter get. Mm-hmm. Now, recruiters can get that obviously with commissions and all that, but this was base salary. So mind blown, right? But I think we were seeing such an influx of people wanting to hire recruiters and commanding these really high salaries. And it was really competitive as far as getting the good recruiting talent, the good tech talent. So companies were paying these really inflated salaries because that's what they were. We went from here to here. They didn't bridge that gap.
Yeah, it didn't make sense.
It was extreme, right?
It was extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. And then now it could be that companies like Meta are trying to balance out those salary bands because they did pay such extreme salaries back then. And so you probably have some recruiters that were on this, lower end or average end. And then you went to this extreme to bring in this new tech talent. And now you need to level it out, right?
Yeah. What bothers me, and that I get bothered by this, is like, where was the goddamn conversation? So, it's like on the other side of the coin, I remember having lots of conversations with recruiters in the last couple of years as these salaries went up. And I said like, look, love the salary, good for you, but that's high, right? Like, that you're the first one going, or you're the first one that's going to be asked to take a pay cut, right? Like, please know that, like, enjoy it while it's here, right? And I think we need to. I think the recruiting industry needs to do that. So I think as an organization, I would have said, hey, I think, look, I love you guys. The ROI is amazing from you all. Like, you guys have really given it, but the salaries right now for the market, it's very inflated. So we have two choices. One, we can lay you off, and good luck. And well, here's your severance. Good luck to you. We'll give you reference, all those good things. Or you can take a pay cut to stay here and do the same job and rock it with us. And, could you get back to your salary? Maybe, but we got to be honest. We think it was very inflated and we might not ever get back to that salary. Having those very candid conversations and then letting them choose, I think is the right way to do it. And also say, like, we are going to try to hire people with lower salaries, because I think what sucks is to see your job up there and be like, I would have worked for that salary. I don't know. That's rough. I would be super upset about that. And I'm really surprised that they wouldn't just ping their staff that they laid off, because I do know projects come up all the time. So why wouldn't they just be like, hey, because I know, actually, I know a recruiter that this happened to, and you know them as well. But he was really upset because he was, struggling to find a job, as most people were a few months ago. It's getting a little easier now, which is nice, but he was struggling. And then he saw the posting for his role. So same thing. So he actually saw it and he was so shocked. He reached out to me. He was like, what do I do? Like, I am so angry. I'm so, just taken back by it. I was doing a good job. I always got good performance reviews. Why wouldn't they call me? And he was literally just kind of sad about it. Like, why wouldn't they call me? Like, that sucks. And I'm like, well, let me ask you this. Do you want to go back? And he was like, no. And then of course, no, now he's like, no, I'll never go back. Now he's upset, right? Which is, it is what it is, but maybe they didn't want to offend him, but they still offended him. So, it's like, sometimes there's no right thing to do because it's still going to upset somebody, but yeah. Crazy.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that. Like, I think, again, it sucks. Like, it really sucks. I've been in this situation before and it was years ago, but it absolutely sucks to be the person in that position. But from a business standpoint, you have to look at, like, they were paying these inflated salaries because they were inflated. We're all going to, we're recruiters. We can say that they were inflated. So they're paying these inflated salaries and then they have to go to a person and they have to say, we're going to cut your pay, which is, it doesn't feel good. It's going to make them feel like shit. It 9 times out of 10 is going to result in somebody being disgruntled, regardless of the fact that the salary was inflated from the beginning, like in the first place.
Sure.
So it's kind of clean slating it. It's like, we're going to get somebody who's happy to be here, who's happy to have a job, who's happy to accept the salary that we're bringing them in at if they get somebody fresh off the street. Again, I'm a recruiter. If I was in this situation, I'd be like, fuck them. It would suck. It would absolutely suck. But from a business standpoint, if I truly take a step back, I can understand why companies are doing that. It sucks, but I understand that and we say it all the time. Nobody likes to have conversations because they view them as confrontation. So the likelihood
100%.
of CEOs having these conversations with people and knowing that they've got to deal with somebody that's going to be potentially disgruntled because you're cutting their pay, no matter which way you slice it, that doesn't feel good. And so it's not a reflection of their work. It's a reflection of the inflated salary, but it still doesn't feel good. And so it's like they can clean slate it and start with somebody new and take advantage of the market right now where there's so many recruiters available who are just looking for a job and would be willing to accept a salary at the normal level or average range that a recruiter would be brought into an organization at, obviously depending upon their experience, all those things. I'm not saying an entry-level recruiter, but I still if people take a step back and look outside the situation, you could really understand why a company would do that. If you're one of those people that you're really professional and you knew your salary was inflated and you were just happy to have it, but you would have taken the project or taken a lesser salary just to stay there, that would suck because it's like, well, you didn't give me the courtesy of a conversation. You're kind of lumping me in with everybody else, assuming I'd be disgruntled. So again, I see it all ways and I see it both ways and how it would feel like absolute shit. And again, having been there years ago, I understand it does feel like shit. But I think if you look at the business justification behind why companies might be trying to do this, it makes a lot of sense. But to your point, where's the conversation? But I think real quick, like I think that's where you know who you're working for. You've got to really like the Metas, the Amazons of the world. Those CEOs aren't calling you all. Like they're not. And so I think that's where you've got to recognize who you work for and understand that like these courtesies that you would expect in a smaller organization and probably get in a smaller organization, you're probably not going to get in a large one like that.
100%. You are just as little to be fish in a giant pond.
Sure.
So you do have to know what you signed up for, and so when you do have inflated salaries at the fangs of the world, inflated stock packages, benefits, bonuses. I mean, like you signed up not to move the needle anywhere, really.
Yeah.
I mean, like, sure. Some of the work you're going to do is going to be great. I'm not saying that no one's doing good work at these places because they're very successful for a reason, but no one's going to miss you when you're gone. Unfortunately, not in the grand scheme of things, not when there's hundreds of thousands of people there, not when the team's 1,000 people. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. What I think is interesting, and to your point, is it's a culture reset.
Yeah.
Like we're going to get out all of the bad mojo that probably came with us fucking up. And now we're going to culture reset this and we're going to build the right way. And hopefully they do build the right way. But you know what? As we've seen many, many times, they're not going to build the right way. They're going to do the same shit over and over again. And we see that happening in AI.
Yeah.
So we have seen all of the big talent because all the FANG companies, I love myself some tech, but man, they don't do things right a lot of times. And they decided that, you know what, we have so much money, we're just going to gather up all the badass engineers and we'll just use them whenever the fuck we need them. We might not
Yeah.
need them now, but we're just going to gather them. We're going to hoard them, which I think is insane. And so now Netflix, Apple, same shit. They're starting hoarding AI engineers because obviously you can't even be in a conversation without someone talking about AI at this point. So it's like we're just going to hoard them, and they're paying them $700,000. Like that is not sustainable. Like, does anyone understand that?
Yeah. And I think if you go into it, a mentality, to your point exactly, it's not sustainable. So if you're going to it with the mentality of like, I'm just going to get this salary that I can get for as long as I can get it and be grateful for that, like going back to that recruiter that was making, 400K, right? Yeah. If you make that for a year, when you're used to making, like, let's say like 120, 150, I mean, you're doing great if you make that for a year. You know what I mean? But I think it's like you have to be realistic. When you have an inflated salary, that can't set the standard for the salary that you expect to get for the duration of your career. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think also with everybody's just got to know, I think at this point, I don't know how they couldn't know if you keep any kind of pulse on the market whatsoever. If you go work for a FANG company or a very large tech company, we've seen just in the last 2 years kind of how volatile that can be. Those work environments, the market specifically. And so I think you just got to know that it could come and you're just another number. Now, if you go for like a smaller startup that maybe is paying you a little bit less, you could stay there. That could be sustainable. That could be something where they could weather the storm in even a difficult time. But these larger companies like that, the bottom's going to fall out. Like exactly what you said with hoarding these engineers and whatnot. Those engineers are not going to be still there and making $700,000 in 5 years. I guarantee you, it's not going to be the case. So I think if you go towards a smaller company, I know it feels really great or it's like sounds sexy to say you work for a FANG company, but when you really look at the culture aspect, how they treat people, what's sustainable, and just the trends that we've seen in the last few years, I'd make a decision off of that all day long.
Yeah, no, for sure. So like, for my entire career, I've been working with seed, Series A, Series B to Series C. And then as I, grew up in my career, I started working with more Series C, Series D and pre-IPOs and then again, public companies. So I got more towards the big ones, but I am very used to fighting FANG versus startup all day long, big fish, little fish. And now I think even more so, like it's got to be super, not simple because it's still challenging when it comes to talent. It always will be, but like it's got to be a lot easier to convince someone to join your small startup than it would be to join these ones that just lay off in masses.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it too, if you join a startup, you're not just another number. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you're kind of one of the founding employees, one of the first ones, like boots on the ground, then they're probably more inclined to figure out ways to keep you, even in, situations where they're facing some financial constraints. You know what I mean? Like I've seen it happen before. I saw it specifically, around COVID time, where a lot of companies, leadership was taking 1 pay cut, leadership was taking 2 pay cuts. They were doing whatever they could to try to keep who they had and weather that storm, which I have a lot of respect for, because it's like those companies will treat you like you're a member of their family. They will treat you like they actually give a shit about you. These larger companies, maybe a lot, look better on your resume, so you feel, to say that you worked for one of them. But at the end of the day, if you worked for one of them for a year, what's that going to say? Before you got laid off? Like what impression does that get versus you were with this startup and helped scale this startup for 5 years and, eventually could end up at the salary that maybe a Meta or an Apple or wherever was going to pay you year one. You could get there. I do feel you can work towards these great salaries that you want to be at, but I don't think if you are lucky enough to get one time based on capitalizing on the market or trends that are happening right then, I don't think that can establish the tone or set the tone for you for what salaries you command from here on out. Like that recruiter that was at the company that paying $400K got laid off, I want to say within like 6 months, if I remember correctly.
Oh, wow. Now I want to go look. Crazy.
Yeah, within like 6 months. And it's like, well, shit, you left this other job that you had because they were a passive person. So you left this other job that you had to go work for this sexy sounding company that was sexy. And then you were laid off and you were entering the job market with hundreds of thousands of other people versus if you had just stayed where you were at for 5 years.
Oh, that's rough. Ugh.
It is rough. It's
wow.
real rough.
Okay. So what advice do you have? So let's just pretend you're at Meta, you've gotten laid off, you see your job now posted. What do you do?
Well, I mean, yeah, I was going to ask you the same thing because I'm really curious. But I think we'll have the I think we'll have a similar perspective on it. One of the first things that I wouldn't do is go rant about it on LinkedIn.
Oh God, that is the worst. These
And
rants that we are seeing, it takes all of my being not to rant back at them and just like you are a fool right now. Like, do you know that there's nothing good's going to come out of this?
and it's not like, not only is it it's a bad look for all companies when they see
Everybody.
that you're
Yeah.
complaining about it. Even if that company did you wrong, even if you've, whether it's this situation with salaries or not, even if they did you wrong, you don't go publicly like bash them, because
Mhm.
other companies are going to look at that when they're going to hire you and looking at your social. And it's not a good look. It doesn't make you more hireable because you're more vocal about your complaints.
Mhm.
You know?
I'm going to put one caveat on it. If you were like sexually assaulted, if it was something like really extreme on that and you wanted to warn other women, warn other people, that I would go up the mountain for that one. But
yeah, no, I think that's something completely different. Like, I think if it's just salaries and it's just a market thing, I think,
Yeah.
you know, that's a
Totally.
whole nother beast. But I think this is something that's like, it's only going to do you a disservice in a job hunt if they see that you were laid off and then you go and you make a rant about it, about being laid off, like whatever that looks like. So, you know, circumstances like what you're talking about, but just a mass layoff like that, it's not going to be a good look for you.
Mhm.
So that's one of the first things that I wouldn't do. I definitely think it's fair to reach out to have that conversation that you wished you could have had, you know? And I think but I think you still have to approach it with the same grace and tact that we talked about whenever we said how you should approach being laid off, you know, remember several months back.
Mhm.
I think you've still got to approach it that way, knowing that you're probably, if you reach out to the recruiter that you worked with, if you reach out to the hiring manager who could be your old manager, you've got to understand that, especially in these larger organizations, they're also a small fish in a large pond, and they only have so much control and so much say so and so much influence. And so to reach out to them, and even if you don't get the answer that, you know, an answer you don't want, right, which is like, hey, it's out of my hands, because most likely it is, you cannot go then and attack them. I think that handling it with grace is like the move. It's the way to go. And I mean, obviously, if you have like some outburst, they're not more inclined to hire you back because you cuss them all out, you know?
Yeah. So you would ask to go back.
I would ask what the circumstance. I would just have the conversation like, hey, I saw my role posted. Can we just talk about this? You know, having been laid off, I would just like to understand what it is you're looking for. Is this I would ask conversations, because having been internal most of my career, I know that sometimes things look one way externally and they're not actually that way internally.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think a conversation needs to happen either way, but I think, you know, that's how you approach it. You don't go on a rant about it. Try to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think for my own like sanity and my security, like my confidence and stuff like that, I would absolutely reach out. Like, let's just assume my manager's still there, or the HR person still, whoever is still there that you had a relationship with that you could have a conversation with. I'd absolutely reach out, because I would want to know, was there something I could do? Was my salary too high? Can I come back? But here's the other thing. Like, let's look back. If you're ever laid off or even fired, well, no, let's say if you're ever laid off, let's not talk about being fired. It's totally different. If you're laid off, I would ask, hey, am I rehirable? Like, did you like me here? You know, did I do good things? Can I have a good reference? Because that's one of those with an exit interview, it will always ask the company, is this person rehirable? And I would just straight up ask them. So like, if you can't go back, right, then go forward, and I would ask them. But it also depends on if there's really no ill will. Like, if you did enjoy working there, then do it again. You know, and you kind of have to, you know, like you said, taking a pay cut hurts, but you do have to swallow your pride a little bit. And you also have to self-reflect. Maybe you were overpaid, maybe you weren't. But did you like the job? Do you see yourself there, or do you want to go hunt? That's choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think you brought up a great point about getting a reference. I think that's something that everybody should do whenever at the point that you're laid off, because that's one thing we need to make sure that people understand is being fired and being laid off are two completely different things. You can be a badass employee and be laid off. You know what I mean? If you're fired, there's reasons that you're fired. And you also need to know those reasons. If you're laid off, you need to know those. But when you're laid off, it's totally fair and completely normal. And I actually, like, when I've experienced when I've experienced these layoffs, whether I've been the one laid off or I've had to lay off people, unfortunately, I hope they ask me for a reference. That's like a step that just like when you're talking about interviews and you want to make sure, like, that's one thing you always do is you make sure you have questions in the interview. That's how you show up. Make sure to ask for a reference at the point that you are laid off. And then also that'll give you something to take back to have this conversation. Like, I mean, because what if 6 or 8 months goes by? And then you see your job posted, but you've got this really great reference letter that you can remind them of how great of an employee you were and the kind things they had to say about you and your performance and your work at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's almost like, okay, let's just say no one's left that you were in contact with. I think when I'm applying for that role, I'm sending my reference through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, be like, and by the way, like, you guys referenced me and here's what that looks like as opposed to my resume, be kind of interesting.
Oh, I would absolutely submit it along with my resume, but I think that's like, absolutely, you should do that. If you're going back, that should be like, so that's a good tip for our listeners is that if you do get a reference from a company that you are interested in going back to and having those conversations, spark their memory with that reference letter via the direct conversation that you're going to have with the contact you reach out to or when you go to apply. Because I also know that probably sucks to people to think, wait, I've got to go through a whole application and interview process for a company I already worked at.
Yeah. But, if there's no one left and there's no contacts, I mean, they still have to. And then also it's like you've changed, they've changed. There's all sorts of stuff. But I let me ask you this, because I think this would really help people. I love how you just like shimmied. By the way, you guys can watch this on our YouTube channel, The Millionaire Recruiter. So I definitely suggest you do that because I don't know, it's pretty fun. But when you're going back, do you feel embarrassed?
Yeah.
You think so?
If you're asking me?
Yeah.
I think you shouldn't. But I think I don't think you should. So I'm going to put that disclaimer out there for everybody. I don't think you should. But I do think if you talking about these circumstances, right? If you were one of these people at this really high salary, you're on top of the world and you got this job and you're working for this sexy company, then you get laid off. Well, that feels embarrassing, even though it's not your fault and it shouldn't feel embarrassing. That feels embarrassing. So to go back again and think about, what comes with being laid off. You're telling your family, you're like, there's a lot of emotions attached to it and tied up in it. And then you go back there and imagine. So whenever my reaction to that was playing it out in my head of like, hypothetically, if I were to go and work for Meta and have made this extreme salary and I'm real proud of it. And I tell my family and I tell like my person who I'm always trying to make proud, which is my dad, I tell him and he's like, that's fucking awesome. And then I'm laid off in a year. And then I go back to working for that company at a 25% fraction of what I was making, 50%, 25%. It could be like, it could be less than half if I'm being realistic to go then have that conversation. To the person that I would feel embarrassed, even though I have no reason to feel embarrassed. It would feel like you accomplished this milestone of like getting to this salary band and then you had to take a step back. And so, I could see people feeling embarrassed and I personally would, even though I don't think there's any reason anybody should. It's feelings, not facts. So
sure. Yeah. Well, so I actually, I don't have this personal experience, but I have it on the other side where I've taken people back before. Maybe they left to do their own thing. Maybe they left because we had an argument. Maybe, like there's been a couple of different situations, right? Or maybe they got laid off. But I have taken people back and there are probably about maybe 6 to 8 people that I think about that, like, if our company was in a different situation, that I would hire them back and I would have no problem calling them back. Now here from an owner's perspective, like there's definitely like a little feelings for me and being like, hey, like, am I being an asshole for calling them back after I let them go? Or, you know what I mean? Or we parted ways. Like, is that a difficult conversation? But I don't know. I think at the end of the day, because I have done it, right? And even, a past employee here, he still works in the office with us and works for a different company. I freaking love that guy, And so I think for that, like, as long as you were like a true person, a true mentor, a true leader, a true team player, stuff like that, I think those conversations and feelings can actually go over really well. But I love that you shared your vulnerability, that you actually would be embarrassed, because I think most people would say that. But you somehow need to not be, because you know what, if you liked the business, you were just caught in a shitty situation, like that's okay. Yeah. That's totally okay.
Well, and I think the caveat to that is going back to the same company. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like if going back to the situation that I outlined, like if I was working for Meta, making 400K and I got laid off and I was really proud at the time to like tell everybody got laid off, it's very specific to going back to that same employer that I think would
Right.
feel the part that for me that would feel the
Mhm.
most embarrassing. So like if I went from a 400K salary to a 200K salary, but I went to work for a mom and pop shop at 200K, I would just be proud to say, hey, I got another job. This is my salary. It would feel somehow, and again, these are my feelings, it's not
Yeah.
facts. It would feel less embarrassing than like taking the ex back that cheated on you type thing.
Well, for sure. But okay, let me put it to you in a different manner then. Like, what if there wasn't a real salary difference? What if maybe it was very, very slight or not a salary difference at all? Would you go back to a company
To
and
the
feel
same
fine?
company?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, assuming it was just a layoff, because again, anybody that
Yeah.
I've ever had to lay off or, the time that I was laid off, there wasn't bad blood. It was truly business circumstances and it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And anytime I've had to do layoffs, which has been more than once, unfortunately, I'm very real about like what that probably feels like to that person. It affects your livelihood. I've been in that situation. It sucks. Like I'm, I'll sit there for hours with them if I need to. I'm very empathetic because I know how bad that situation sucks to despite it being out of whoever's control, it
Mhm.
sucks to have a job and have stability and then not have it anymore. I don't care who you are. That sucks.
Yeah.
So I think being able to really relate to them and like it's all about how it ends, right? Like if somebody goes, well, fuck you and loses their shit, which fortunately for me, I've never had in a layoff. I've had it in other situations, but not in a layoff. And I think, yeah, absolutely go back. It's just business conditions that are dictating that layoff. Otherwise, you'd
Yeah.
be fired if it was your performance. It'd be a firing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that mentally people don't understand that that's very different. And I think
Yes.
that that's sad, which is a totally different conversation. But yeah, so I think I know you'll do your amazing broke to boss tip, but really to kind of like wrap up in my theories when we're seeing layoffs and then quick job postings of the same thing. Like, I mean, I even know someone whose job was posted weeks, like just a couple of weeks after they were laid off. And like, that person did go on a rant, And so
Yeah.
like, but like, please, if you're going to rant, call your friend, rant on Google Docs, don't rant on LinkedIn. But yeah, no, it doesn't feel good. But like, I think that your decision is up to you. Do you want to go back? Have that conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
And also you have to understand too that you may want to go back, but the opportunity may not exist there. And that's
Sure.
a whole nother thing that could feel really, really gross. Like that's where I think those really negative emotions for me would probably come in is it's like, well, no, we just want to clean slate it. Even though I left gracefully, I left with tact. I
Mhm.
didn't, go on any rants. I just saw my job posted and wanted to have a conversation about it. And then they're like, no, we kind of want to clean slate it. Even if you were a great performer, even if
Yeah.
you were willing to take the lesser salary, I think that could feel really gross. But I think my broke to boss tip for everybody, as hard as this is like, do not go on your rants. Like you said, call your friends, call somebody and talk to them about it. Do not publicly go on a rant and publicly bash a company because I guarantee you it's not a good look for not for you with regards to that company if you wanted to go back, but for any future company when they go look at your social footprint and see that you put this post up and just bashed a previous employer. It's like we always say in job interviews, don't bash your previous employer. This is you publicly doing that.
Yeah, and it's you doing it on a giant platform.
Yeah.
What I think is, I just want to like add to this because I love that broke to boss tip. Is I want to add, you are your brand.
Yeah.
If you owned a company, would you be okay with that rant on your brand? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So I think people, especially in the age where like, I mean, how many times we asked to be brand ambassadors? Like, I love that shit. Like I want to promote the things that I love and have people use them. That's really cool. And that's great. But yeah, that's a brand. Everyone has a brand. You are a brand.
And even if you don't get what you want out of the conversation, move on. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know that people are probably like this bitch over here. It's so much easier to just say move on. But I've been in those shoes before and it sucks. And as much as you want to bitch and complain, talk to your friends. But if you don't get what you want out of the conversation, because it's fair to ask for one,
Yep.
if you don't get what you want out of the conversation, move on. Just know what's meant for you is meant for you. And that wasn't it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
move forward.
Yeah, you can only control what you can control.
Yep.
Yourself. I love it. Oh, this was actually meatier than I had even anticipated. I love that. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. Would love to hear really personal stories. Like you hear us every week, be very vulnerable. We dig it. We like it. We know it helps. It helps us. I mean, we get out of here supercharged. So we would love to hear, how we've affected that. And I know we want to do a shout out to one of our listeners, and Taylor, I'll let you do it, on what did someone buy the other day for a little person.
Oh, I was like, shut up. So they bought little onesies, Talent Takeover Unfiltered onesies for their brand new baby boy. So shout out to Anil. We are so happy for you. Congratulations. He's beautiful. He sent us pictures. And we went on there and like custom made him some onesies for his baby. So
that was so cool. So Kate does that behind the scenes, just so you all know. And she sent it via Slack. She's like, do you guys love us? I'm like, oh my God, that was like the best Slack I've gotten like all week.
You're like, where's my onesie?
I know,
you
right?
would wear one.
I want a one. I have onesies.
Shocker. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Bye.
Bye.